And you have to remember that HR is not your friend. HR is not your friend.
God, boss just put a meeting in my calendar with her manager in it too. I'm about to get fired. Have they ever booked a meeting like this with you before? No, this is the first one. But she's been complaining about my work lately. I feel like I just can't get it right. This is probably just some sort of firm warning meeting. Maybe you'll get a PIP. What's a PIP? It's a performance improvement plan. It's the first step if an employee isn't performing the way that their boss wants them to. It basically states exactly what the employee needs to do in order to actually succeed in the role.
What's up, everybody? It is the Corporate Mom. My name is Isatu. I want to welcome you to my channel so we can talk about important topics in the corporate world as well as motherhood. I'm not excited about today's topic. I'm just not. It is not a topic that I want to talk about, but it's important, so we have to talk about it. And I don't want for the first time you hear about this to be when it's brought up to you, because by then, no, we don't want that. We're going to be talking about performance improvement plans today. So let's go ahead and get into the topic. So if your manager puts you on a performance improvement plan, it is time to get serious about what the next 30 to 90 days is going to look like for you at that company or in that role. Immediately, you want to start asking questions, both to yourself and to your manager. What is the root of this performance improvement plan? And I'm going to be calling it PIP for the rest of the video because that's the acronym for it and it's just a little bit easier to say. Am I performing well and my manager just isn't seeing it? Am I being targeted? Like, how fair is this PIP? Am I not doing a good job of communicating my work and the impact it's having to my manager? Am I really not doing a good job? This requires some introspection, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. But this is an honest question that you have to answer so that you can be more prepared to go through the PIP or make a decision about the PIP. Do I have the resources that I need to do my job? Did I see this coming? Should I quit before I'm fired? Is the PIP based on my work, my personality? Like, what is the PIP about? Because it can be about your work and the impact that you have or don't have, or it can be about your personality and how others are experiencing you as an individual, as a worker, and that could be what's driving this PIP. And this is probably the most important question aside from the introspection that you have to do, because once you have a PIP at your feet, like, there's something going on. But the question that you really have to ask yourself is, do I want to stay at this company and go through this PIP and overcome this PIP? Or is this a sign that it's time for me to move on? So a PIP really should not come as a surprise to you. And if it does, there's a huge gap in communication between you and your manager. Really, the question that I asked earlier around, did I see this coming? There should be some indications that something is wrong before a PIP is placed in front of you. If you are having regular one-on-ones with your manager, which you should be, then you will see this coming. But if you're not having regular one-on-ones, I would recommend that you do that right away, like without even the PIP conversation. If you are not having regular one-on-ones with your manager, weekly, bi-weekly, no fewer than bi-weekly. Like, you don't need to go 3 weeks without talking to your manager. But if you are having regular one-on-ones with your manager, then there should be concerns that come up regularly that would lead you to believe that maybe a PIP is right around the corner. If you're having regular one-on-ones and you didn't see the PIP coming, that is a failure on your manager's part. Unless your manager is just being very explicit about you not meeting expectations, you not living up to the standards that they want you to in that role, barring your manager explicitly stating it and you just letting it fly over your head or not taking it seriously, once a PIP becomes a topic of conversation between you and your manager, it truly should not come as a surprise. And if it comes as a surprise, like a genuine surprise, then you might be targeted unfairly by your manager, and it may be time to get HR involved just so you understand the full scope of what's going on. But if it doesn't come as a surprise, that's when we start talking about the other things in this episode of how to address the PIP, how to get out of the PIP, and if you want to stay at a company, how to not let that tarnish your reputation. Now, before we get into what to do with the PIP, let's talk about what the PIP is. So according to a quick Google search, a PIP is a written document that identifies how an employee is falling short of expectations and what needs to be done to improve and stay employed. So let's dissect that. So written document, your manager is going to have to sit down and write down their expectations for you for the role and write down how you're not meeting those expectations. This needs to be very clear, very explicit, very concise, unless there's just a lot going on, which is another story. But like, your manager has to sit down and in a very clear way document what is it that you're not meeting when it comes to the expectations and how you're not meeting those expectations. Which brings me to the next point, falling short on expectations. you need to understand why. What are the expectations? Are they new? Are they reasonable? These things may be things that you already wrote down in like a priority list at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the quarter, whatever it is. But those expectations should have already been agreed upon between you and your manager, hence why you would be falling short. If it's net new, then that should be something that your manager would have communicated in a one-on-one. And if not, then a net new expectation in the PIP means that it needs to be justified. Somebody needs to tell you, I didn't expect this from you before, or it was an implied expectation and now I'm writing it down explicitly in the written document so you know what's expected of you. The next is what needs to be done to improve. This also needs to be very clear and very explicit in terms of these are the targets you need to hit. These are the behaviors I need you to exhibit. These are the things that I need you to change so that I can feel like you are meeting those expectations at the end of the PIP. And last but not least, certainly not least, staying employed. That's the last piece of like the PIP. Like at the end of the 30, 60, or 90 days, however long the PIP is, that's where it's important for you to determine, do I want to stay employed even if I'm successful in the PIP? Or do I want to just bounce? Because clearly something is wrong. And that depends on so many different factors. So the staying employed part on your side, that's the decision that you have to make. But on the company side, the reason why this is a written document that needs to be signed by the manager, by you, and by HR, by the way, is because this is a way for the company to say, here are the things that you need to accomplish within this time frame to meet these expectations. And if you don't, you can be terminated. It is grounds for termination. And it's really the company trying to protect themselves because they're giving you a last chance to get it together before they show you the door. And what I really hate about PIPs is because it's kind of a dark cloud that just looms over your head. Once it's at your table, you're like, oh my God, I have a PIP. And you know, the good news is most people will not know you're on a PIP, but some people might know you're on a PIP. It just depends on the culture. But once it's gotten to that point, it can really feel like you're trying to play catch up. You're trying to prove yourself and your morale is low because you're on this PIP. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, this catch-22 of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But it is not an end-all be-all. It is not a death sentence on that role, on that job. So you can succeed in a PIP. I will be honest, based on metrics I've seen, success rates for PIPs are not the highest. And I think that has a lot to do with how the employee feels being on a PIP. So how motivated are they to beat the PIP? But it is doable depending on how you feel and how you want to proceed with the PIP. If you love the job, if you love the company, if you want to stay and you dedicate yourself to meeting the targets indicated within the PIP, you can beat the PIP. Okay, if you don't care or if you get stuck in your head about the fact that you're on a PIP, then it can be really hard for you to overcome that and be successful in the PIP and stay employed. And going back to the video I made on company culture, I feel like if a company fosters a culture of curiosity, learning and development, and growth and strong leadership, PIPs can be avoided. Because it really takes a lot to have to put somebody on a PIP. They have to consistently fail to meet your expectations. They have to consistently not be performing well. And if you're not, as a manager, communicating that and providing the resources for your employee to get better, if you have to get to a PIP with your employee, I feel like that's a sign of a bad manager. Or it's a sign that the company wants to kindly show you the door, but they want you to quit because they want you to be upset about the PIP and not perform well. And they've already got it documented that if you don't perform well, they can fire you without any retribution. So it really is like a delicate thing that you have to think about. That's why I had those questions at the beginning of what is the root of the PIP? Is this a mismatch in personality and culture with the company? Is this bad performance? Is like, what is going on and why am I being put on a PIP is a very important question that you have to ask, because sometimes it can be the company trying to get you to quit before they can fire you. And sometimes you can make a decision also to show yourself out before they decide to fire you. And you have to remember that HR is not your friend. HR is not your friend. But I want to pivot now to a bit more of a positive spin on PIPs, because like I mentioned, it can be a dark cloud that looms over you. It can be a demoralizing factor when it comes to your job, but there is some opportunity here, especially if you want to grow and you want to learn and find out what went wrong and how can you fix it. There is an opportunity to do that even through a PIP. So the first thing I would recommend is really go deep, go introspective, and ask yourself the questions that I mentioned in the beginning of why you got to where you are in the first place, and then you can make a decision about what to do next. If you feel like the PIP is warranted, so the question I asked about, Am I not performing well? If you can answer that question honestly and the answer is no, I'm not performing well, then the PIP may be warranted. And if you have a really good manager, which I know is kind of contradictory because I said if you have to put somebody on a PIP, you're probably a bad manager. But let's say the manager has good intentions and maybe they feel like this is a good way for them to express themselves and express their expectations of you in the PIP. So let's say that's the case, right? And you feel like, okay, fine, this is fair, I'm being put on a PIP. What you want to do is you want to make sure you understand every single ask that's being made of you within the PIP. What are the expectations? Are they reasonable? Talk to your manager about every single thing within the PIP and make sure that you feel like you can do it and you're going to put your best foot forward to achieve that. You need to be accountable to yourself. And if you don't do the introspective work of truly finding out what's going on and how you can fix it, you might find yourself in the same position if you were to go to another company anyways. If it's truly that you're not performing well, and that's a hard pill to swallow, but if that's the case, then you need to take the PIP seriously. Even if you don't stay and go through the PIP, you need to take the feedback seriously wherever you go so that you don't end up in the same position. Now, if you feel like the PIP is unwarranted, this is when it's time to game plan, okay? Because either you're being targeted or the things within the PIP don't make sense and you know it's not reasonable for you to accomplish within the time frame that's established by the PIP. Find out if your manager has a reputation of putting other people on PIPs, which can be kind of hard to do, but you need to find out, like, is this just a bad manager who goes around putting people on PIPs to avoid accountability for their bad management? Or it may mean having to leave the company so you can salvage your reputation, because here's the thing, once you've been put on a PIP, it kind of follows you, right? Let's say you apply for another role somewhere else and they ask you where you worked before. They may not call your company before and ask, but I don't know. I just feel like if you've been put on a PIP before, it's kind of hard to get away from that. Leaving before you're fired may be a good way to salvage your reputation in this case. If you feel like the PIP is unfair and the PIP is unreasonable as well, you may just have to leave and not even have to go through the PIP, because then you don't have to talk about it with another employer in the future. You don't have to go through the stress of everyday meetings or every week meetings with your manager to make sure that you are meeting the PIP. It can save you a lot of stress if you don't feel like the PIP is warranted and this is just not the place for you anymore. And maybe that's the company accomplishing its mission of getting you to quit before they can fire you. But sometimes you have to weigh the cost and benefit of what would it take for me to stay and really be successful in this PIP? And then do I want to stay after that? Or what would it take for me to just go ahead and cut my losses and get out of here? And in that case, you are taking a risk as well, because if you're quitting, then you're not going to be able to go and file for unemployment anywhere. Well, if they fire you for a PIP, I don't think you can file for unemployment anyways, because a PIP is just not a good thing, y'all. It's just not. So once you are there, like, honestly, if you want to stay, you got to work really, really, really hard, prove yourself and prove that you don't deserve to be put on a PIP ever again, or you got to quit. You got to quit, or I don't know. There's just not a lot you can do with the PIP. You either go through it and be successful, or you go through it and you're not successful and they fire you. I'm sorry. I said I was going to be positive and talk more. It's really hard to be positive about PIPs. And that's why I didn't like this topic. I just really don't like the topic of PIPs. I just feel like there's only so many paths you can take with a PIP, and most of them are not positive. I mean, some people go through a PIP and the manager is well intended, they go through it, they're successful, and then it's bygones. It's water under the bridge. But let's think about it. Let's be real. If I'm your employee, you put me on a PIP, I don't give a damn how successful I am. I'm always going to be looking at you sideways. Unless you were just like, no, I'm always going to look at you sideways. Why did you put me on a PIP? I need to be more introspective, don't I? I need to be more introspective, and thank God I've not been put on a PIP ever before, and I hope to never be put on a PIP. But like I mentioned, it's just not good. It's just not good. Oh my God. It all comes down to how the PIP was introduced and if you feel like it's warranted or you're being targeted unfairly. So let's just try to avoid PIPs altogether. Okay, that's where I've come down on this issue. Let's try to avoid PIPs altogether, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that. Always document your work. As you go, make sure you're documenting what you're doing in some way, shape, or form so that nobody can come back and say you didn't do this or where's this, what's that. No, document your work. Always communicate up, down, and out to evangelize your work. People need to know what you're doing. So you may be doing a wonderful job in the comfort of your home or in the comfort of your office or in the comfort of your computer, and no one really knows what you're doing. So impact really matters when other people know about it. If you're doing a good job and nobody else knows about it, then that's a really easy case for people to say, well, they're not doing anything. So you need to communicate up, 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 down, 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 out, out, out. You need to make sure that you are telling people what you're doing. Up talk yourself, humble brag, do whatever you have to do, okay? Send a monthly newsletter, send a weekly newsletter. Well, weekly is a bit crazy, but send like a monthly newsletter. Even if you don't have like an audience of people who read it, maybe every month, just like send your manager just a quick summary of things that you've accomplished, so they always know you're working and you're delivering impact. And hopefully you're in a role where there's natural rhythms and natural mechanisms for people to know what you're doing. That's really like the sweet spot where you're gonna have to update other people because other people are depending on your work. That's a sweet spot, because then you don't really have to justify what you're doing. You just have to do a good job and others can see it. But if you are in a role where maybe you're working on a project in isolation, or maybe you're working on something that not a lot of people are touching, you need to, that's your job, that's your responsibility to make sure that others know about it and that you're not in a silo where people have room to doubt your abilities, room to doubt your anything. You need to make sure you shut down all doubt. Maintain open lines of communication with your manager. If you don't have a regular one-on-one set up with your manager, set one up immediately and make it a regular cadence, okay? Every week, every 2 weeks, you need to be talking to your manager. 30 minutes, an hour, maybe an hour is crazy, but like you need to be talking to your manager so they know what you're up to. And you can drive that meeting, okay? You come to the meeting with a quick agenda. Hey, here's what I'm working on. These are some roadblocks that I'm having. I try to reach out to this person. I wasn't able to get a hold of them. Maybe your manager can reach out to their manager, okay? So there's a cycle of how to be an effective and productive employee, and that includes maintaining an open line of communication with your manager so they can never sit there and say that I don't know what this person is up to, or I don't know what this person has accomplished over the last couple months. You never want that to be the case. And sometimes, unfortunately, none of these things work. You may do everything right, and if you just have a shitty manager, if you have a shitty work environment, if you have a shitty project, like sometimes there's just not much that you can do. And in that case, that's when it's time to start looking for your next role. The bottom line is anybody can be put on a PIP, but it is avoidable. So take into consideration some of the tips that I gave, but also share some in the comments if you have others that you'd like to share with others, because honestly, it's the worst thing that can happen in the work environment. Like just being put on a PIP can be an embarrassing thing. It can be a demoralizing thing. It can really tarnish your reputation, okay? So let's just avoid PIPs altogether and let's help each other out where we can. If you see somebody struggling, or if you are working with someone and you see that no one really knows what they're doing, maybe just kind of from a mentorship standpoint, just be like, hey, like what's going on? Like, I don't know. We got to look out for each other because HR is not looking out for us, and sometimes our managers are not either. So make sure you take responsibility and you take accountability and you take the initiative to make sure people know what you're working on and the impact that you have for the business. That's all I had for you guys today on performance improvement plans, and hopefully this is the last time we have to talk about this because I don't wish it on my worst enemy and I don't want anybody to have to ever go through a PIP. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you in the next video.